Welcome back, UPSC aspirants, to your daily deep dive. It's March 21st, 2025, Part 1.
Part 1, that's right.
Today, we've got a really fascinating, I think, set of topics to cover.
Absolutely.
A lot of ground to cover, but I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited.
For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome.
Yes, welcome.
And for those of you who are returning, we're so glad to have you back. We've got a lot to talk about today, so let's just dive right in.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so the first thing that caught my eye was this news about LIC agents protesting new insurance rules.
Yeah.
And, LIC being such a cornerstone of the Indian financial system, obviously, whenever there's any kind of a shakeup or any kind of protest or any kind of, news coming out of LIC, it's worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And it's a huge institution. I mean, the Life Insurance Corporation of India is not just the largest public sector life insurance company, but it's one of the biggest institutional investors in India.
It's a behemoth.
Yeah, headquartered in Mumbai and, really plays a significant role in the Indian financial market.
And they operate under this really powerful motto, right? Yogeshama Vahamyam.
Yeah.
Which kind of speaks to, I think of it almost as a mission statement for the entire, financial well-being of the nation.
Yeah, I mean, it basically means your welfare is our responsibility, and it really underscores that role that LIC plays in providing that financial security to, so many Indians.
And it's interesting because, we think of LIC now as this sort of monolithic entity.
Right.
But it wasn't always like that, right? I mean, the creation of LIC back in 1956 through the Life Insurance of India Act, that was a really major development.
It was a huge moment. Yeah, it was a nationalization and a merger of 245 private insurance companies and provident societies into this single entity.
245,
It's a lot, yeah.
It's mind-boggling to think about how many separate entities were brought together to form this massive institution.
Yeah, it really kind of reshaped the architecture of the financial sector in India.
Yeah, and LSE's reach is pretty extensive, right? I mean, they have how many zonal offices across the country?
They have 8 zonal offices strategically located, all across the country: Delhi, Chennai, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Kanpur, Kolkata, Bhopal, and Patna.
Okay, so those are good locations to keep in mind, too, just for general knowledge and, for understanding maybe some of the regional variations in how they operate.
Right.
Now, let's take a step back for a second and think about the sort of initial steps in the development of the insurance sector in India. What were some of those early milestones?
Well, the first life insurance company in India was actually established way back in 1818. It was called the Oriental Life Insurance Company.
Wow.
But the first insurer that was actually owned by Indians was the Bombay Mutual Life Assurance Society. That was in 1870.
Okay, so there was a gradual shift towards more domestic control over the insurance sector.
Right, and then that led to the need for regulation. So you had the Indian Life Assurance Companies Act of 1912, and then the Indian Insurance Companies Act of 1928, followed by this really landmark legislation, the Insurance Act of 1938.
Which kind of set the stage for everything that followed.
It did. It provided that regulatory framework. It set up, ways to safeguard policyholders' interests and really sort of laid the groundwork for a much more structured and robust insurance sector.
And of course, all of this culminated in 1956 with the formation of LIC.
Yeah, it's also interesting to note that general insurance in India has its own kind of parallel history, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it started with the Triton Insurance Company, LTD, in Calcutta in 1850.
Okay, so 2 distinct paths of development, but both really important in the overall evolution of the insurance industry in India.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about the regulatory environment for LIC specifically, there are a couple of key institutions that come to mind: the FSIB and IRDAI.
Right.
So can you kind of unpack those for us a little bit, explain their roles and why they're so important?
Yeah, so the Financial Services Institutions Bureau, the FSIB, that was set up more recently in 2022.
Yeah.
And its main role is recommending individuals for appointment to these really crucial leadership positions in public sector financial institutions. So it's all about, leadership appointments.
Exactly, yeah, and advising on personnel policies, and really, their vision is to ensure corporate governance excellence in these public sector financial institutions.
Okay, so it's kind of like the headhunting and, corporate governance arm for these institutions.
Yeah, they even have their own secretariat structure to support all these functions.
Okay, and then we have IRDI, which seems to have a much more kind of direct and overarching regulatory role in the insurance sector as a whole.
Right. IRDA, the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, it's a statutory body established under the IRDI Act of 1999.
Okay.
And they have a really wide range of powers and functions. Their job is to promote competition in the insurance market, to ensure the financial security of all the insurance entities operating in India and to regulate the insurance business in accordance with the Insurance Act of 1938.
So they're the watchdogs.
They are the watchdogs, yeah, making sure that everything is running smoothly and fairly.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're kind of drawing their authority from that 1938 act,
Right.
which is really interesting to see that continuity.
It's a long legacy.
Yeah, and then we also have those more specific acts, right, like the Marine Insurance Act of 1963, the Public Liability Insurance Act of 1991.
Right.
That kind of address more niche areas within the insurance field.
Exactly, yeah. So LIC, as we've discussed, is a state-owned insurer. Its main purpose is providing life insurance and financial security, and it's regulated by IRDI and the Ministry of Finance.
Okay, so that's a good overview of the kind of regulatory landscape for LIC.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something completely different, the Sansan-Pashini Initiative,
Okay.
which sounds like a really interesting and innovative step forward for our parliament.
It is. It's a collaboration between the Lok Sabha Secretariat and MITI, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology.
And the goal here is to...
The goal is to develop in-house AI tools that can be used to provide multilingual support within the parliament to optimize the way parliamentary documentation is handled and just generally improve the overall efficiency of parliamentary operations.
So AI in parliament, that's pretty cutting edge.
It is. It's exciting to see how technology is being integrated into these really crucial areas of governance.
Absolutely. What are some of the specific AI applications that they're looking at deploying as part of this initiative?
Well, one of the key applications is going to be a real-time speech-to-text transcription system. So as the proceedings are happening in the parliament, they'll be transcribed into text automatically.
Oh, wow. So no more, relying on stenographers and manual transcription.
Exactly. It'll make everything much faster and more efficient. And then they're also looking at speech-to-speech translation. So you could have someone speaking in Hindi, for example, and it'll be translated into English or Tamil or any other Indian language in real time.
So that just opens up the possibilities for participation and understanding across different linguistic groups.
Exactly. And then they're also planning on developing AI-powered chatbots that can be used to provide information and assistance to members of parliament and their staff.
So it's like having a digital assistant for parliament.
Pretty much, yeah, a very intelligent and efficient digital assistant.
This real-time transcription feature is really fascinating. What are some of the technical aspects that they're focusing on to make sure it works effectively in the parliamentary setting?
Well, one of the big challenges is background noise.
Yeah.
Because obviously Parliament can be a very lively and noisy place, so they're developing algorithms that can filter out that background noise and just focus on the speech itself.
So it's got to be really robust and sophisticated in terms of its ability to handle those noisy environments.
Exactly. And then another challenge is vocabulary, because parliamentary debates often use very specialized terminology.
Legal jargon?
Yeah, so they're developing systems that can learn and adapt to that specialized vocabulary and make sure that everything is transcribed accurately.
It's amazing to think about how far AI has come to be able to handle these kinds of really complex linguistic tasks.
It is, and it's only going to get more sophisticated and powerful in the years to come.
Now I also understand that there's a move towards using AI for automatic summarization of parliamentary debates.
Yeah, that's another really exciting application because parliamentary debates can be quite long and complex.
Yeah, they can go on for hours and hours.
Yeah, so being able to automatically generate a concise and accurate summary of the key points that were discussed, that would be incredibly valuable, both for members of parliament who need to quickly get up to speed on an issue, and for researchers and journalists and anyone else who's trying to understand what's happening in parliament.
So it's all about improving accessibility and efficiency.
Exactly.
So just to kind of recap the Sansan-Pashini Initiative, it's a collaboration between the Lok Sabha Secretariat and MITI.
Right.
The goal is to use AI for things like multilingual support and enhanced documentation, and a key feature of the transcription system is going to be this background noise reduction and customizable vocabulary.
That's right.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Let's move on to something else that caught my attention. Exercise Bangasagar 2025.
Yeah.
This is the latest iteration of the bilateral naval exercise between India and Bangladesh, and it was conducted in the Bay of Bengal.
Right, and it also included a coordinated patrol, which is known as CORPAT.
Okay, so Bangasagar 2025, what was the main purpose of this exercise?
The primary objective was to develop a really high level of interoperability and operational expertise between the Indian Navy and the Bangladesh Navy across a wide spectrum of maritime operations.
So it's all about working together seamlessly.
Exactly.
And this isn't the first time this exercise has been conducted, right?
No, it's actually the fifth edition of this exercise, which commenced in 2019.
Okay, so it's a regular feature of the bilateral defense cooperation between the two countries.
It is, yeah, and it shows the growing importance that both countries attach to their maritime partnership.
Now, which specific ships participated in this year's exercise?
So, from the Indian side, we had INS Ranveer, which is a guided missile destroyer.
Okay.
And from Bangladesh, it was BNS Abu Ubaida.
And what were some of the specific activities or operations that they undertook during the exercise?
Well, they conducted a whole range of exercises, including surface firing exercises, tactical maneuvers at sea, underway replenishment drills, which basically means refueling and resupplying ships while they're at sea.
Okay, so it's all about, maintaining that operational endurance.
Exactly. And then they also practice visit board search seizure or VBSS operations, which are essential for countering piracy and other maritime threats.
Okay, so they're really covering a lot of ground here in terms of different types of operations.
Yeah, and they also had communication drills, professional knowledge quizzes, and a concluding steam past, which is a traditional naval display of camaraderie.
So it's a mix of practical exercises, knowledge sharing, and just kind of building those personal relationships between the two neighbors.
Exactly.
Now tell us a bit more about INS Ranveer. It's a Rajput-class guided missile destroyer, right?
It is, yeah. It's a pretty formidable warship. It's been upgraded with state-of-the-art indigenous weapon systems and sensors.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's a testament to India's growing capabilities in defense technology.
Absolutely. And it was commissioned way back in 1986, so it's been serving the Indian Navy for quite a while.
Okay, so to summarize Exercise Bangasagar, it's a recurring bilateral naval exercise between India and Bangladesh.
Right.
It started in 2019, and in this year's edition, INS Ranveer was a key participant.
That's right.
And the main goal is to strengthen interoperability and cooperation between the two navies in the Bay of Bengal.
Exactly.
Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about something that's been in the news a lot lately, sonic weapons.
Okay.
So there have been reports of Serbia's government being accused of using a banned sonic weapon against protesters.
Yeah.
And this raises a lot of questions about, the ethics of these kinds of weapons and how they're being used. So first of all, can you just define for us what exactly is a sonic weapon?
Yeah, so a sonic weapon, also known as an acoustic weapon, is basically a device that uses sound to disrupt, incapacitate, or even harm individuals.
So it's weaponized sound.
Exactly, and they can emit sounds that are either audible or inaudible to the human ear.
Okay, so we're not just talking about loud noises here.
No, it can be much more sophisticated than that. They can use specific frequencies and waveforms to create very targeted and debilitating effects.
And what were these weapons initially developed for?
Well, their initial development was largely driven by military and law enforcement applications.
Okay.
So things like crowd control, area denial, and even psychological warfare.
Okay, so it's all about, non-lethal ways of controlling or deterring people.
Right, and there was a very controversial instance back in 2004 when the U.S. military reportedly used sonic weapons against insurgents in Iraq.
Right, so that kind of brought this technology into the public consciousness.
It did, yeah, and it sparked a lot of debate about the ethical implications of using these kinds of weapons.
How do these weapons actually work? What's the kind of science behind them?
Well, they typically use transducers, which are devices that convert electrical energy into sound waves.
Okay.
And by using an array of transducers and focusing the sound waves, they can create a very powerful and directed beam of sound.
So it's like a sonic laser.
Pretty much, yeah. And they can control the frequency, the amplitude, and the duration of the sound waves to create a variety of effects.
So what are some of the different types of sonic weapons that have been developed?
Well, one of the most well-known types is the long-range acoustic device, or LRAD.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, these are used by law enforcement and military units for crowd control, and they can emit incredibly loud sounds up to 160 decibels.
160 decibels, that's louder than a jet engine.
It is, yeah, and exposure to that kind of sound can cause a whole range of effects, from ear pain and hearing damage to nausea, dizziness, and even disorientation.
So even though they're often categorized as non-lethal, they can clearly cause serious harm.
Absolutely. And then there's the mosquito device, which emits a high-pitched sound that's only really audible to people under the age of 30.
Okay, so it's like a sonic teenager repellent.
Pretty much, yeah. It's used to deter loitering and antisocial behavior by creating an annoying sound that only young people can hear.
That's kind of ingenious in a way.
It is, yeah. And then there are infrasonic weapons, which emit sound waves that are below the range of human hearing.
Okay, so we can't even hear them, but they can still have an effect on us.
Exactly. Yeah, exposure to infrasound can cause all sorts of strange and unpleasant sensations like headaches, nausea, vertigo, and even internal organ damage at high enough intensities.
So it's like a silent but potentially deadly weapon.
It can be, yeah. And it's an area that's still being researched, but there are a lot of concerns about the potential misuse of this technology.
And it's understood that several countries, including the US, China, and Russia, have developed and even deployed these types of sonic weapons.
That's right, yeah. It's a growing area of concern for the international community.
Let's move on to a different kind of challenge, India's efforts to combat neglected tropical diseases.
Yeah.
And India has actually made some pretty remarkable progress in this area, right?
It has, yeah. Through a combination of political will, community involvement, and regional cooperation, India has really been able to make significant strides in the fight against NTDs.
So first of all, for those who might not be familiar, can you define what exactly are neglected tropical diseases?
Yeah, so NTDs are a group of infectious diseases that primarily affect impoverished communities in tropical and subtropical regions.
Okay,
They're called neglected because they haven't historically received the same level of attention and funding as other major diseases.
right, even though they affect millions of people.
Exactly, yeah. And they have a devastating impact on health, social, and economic well-being.
What are some examples of NTDs that are prevalent in India?
Well, there are quite a few, actually, but some of the most common ones include guinea worm disease, chikungunya, dengue, kala-azar, which is also known as visceral leishmaniasis, and elephantiasis, which is also known as lymphatic filariasis.
So there's a whole range of different types of NTDs.
Yeah, and they're caused by a variety of pathogens, including viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi, and even toxins.
And what makes these diseases so difficult to control and eliminate?
Well, one of the big challenges is that they often thrive in environments with poor sanitation, limited access to clean water, and inadequate health care.
So it's a vicious cycle of poverty and disease.
Exactly, yeah. And many NTDs are also vector-borne, which means they're transmitted by insects or other animals.
Right, so controlling the vectors is also a major challenge.
Yeah, and the pathogens themselves often have very complex life cycles, which makes it difficult to develop effective treatments and prevention strategies.
And the scale of this problem is pretty immense, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Globally, it's estimated that NTDs affect over 1 billion people, and 1.5 billion people require some form of intervention.
So it's a huge burden on global health.
Absolutely, and it's something that requires a coordinated global effort to address.
And there's an international day dedicated to raising awareness about NTDs, right?
Yeah, World NTD Day is observed every year on January 30th.
Okay, so that's a good day to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's a time to reflect on the challenges posed by NTDs and to renew our commitment to fighting these diseases.
And just to clarify a couple of those terms that you mentioned, Kala-azar, that's a severe form of leishmaniasis, right?
That's right, yeah, it's a parasitic infection that's transmitted by sandflies.
And chikungunya, that's a viral disease that's transmitted by mosquitoes.
Right,
Okay, so both of those are vector-borne diseases.
they are.
Okay, let's shift gear again and talk about something that affects all of us in our daily lives, the merchant discount rate, or MDR.
Okay.
And there's been some interesting news recently about an incentive scheme for low-value BHIM UPI transactions.
Yeah, the government has announced that small merchants will not have to pay any MDI for low-value BHIM UPI transactions.
Okay, so that's a big incentive for people to use digital payments.
It is, yeah, and to encourage small businesses to adopt digital payment systems.
So can you just explain for us what exactly is MDR and why is it significant?
Yeah, so MDR stands for Merchant Discount Rate, and it's basically a fee that merchants have to pay to banks and payment processors whenever a customer makes a payment using a debit card, a credit card, or a UPI app.
Okay, so it's like a transaction fee.
It is, yeah, and that fee is typically shared between several parties involved in the transaction, including the issuing bank, which is the bank that issued the customer's card, the acquiring bank, which is the bank that provides the merchant with the point of sale or POS terminal,
Okay,
the card network, which is typically Visa or MasterCard,
right.
and the payment gateway, which is the technology platform that connects everything together.
Okay, so it's a complex ecosystem with a lot of different players.
It is, yeah, and the MDR is a way of compensating all of those players for the services they provide.
And the MDR is calculated as a percentage of the transaction amount, right?
That's right, yeah, and the percentage varies depending on a number of factors, including the type of card being used, the merchant's industry, and the volume of transactions they process.
Okay, so there's no fixed MDR rate.
No, it's dynamic and it can change over time.
So this new incentive scheme for BMUPI transactions, how does that work exactly?
Well, basically, the government is going to be reimbursing banks for the MDR that they would have otherwise collected from small merchants for low-value BMUPI transactions.
Okay, so the government is essentially subsidizing the cost of digital payments?
That's right. Yeah, they're trying to incentivize both merchants and customers to adopt digital payments.
And why is that so important for the government?
Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all, digital payments are more transparent and accountable, which helps to reduce corruption and black money.
Okay,
They're also more efficient and cost-effective than cash transactions because you don't have to deal with the cost of printing, storing, transporting, and securing physical cash.
right.
And digital payments can also help to boost financial inclusion by bringing more people into the formal financial system.
So it's really a win-win situation for everyone involved.
It can be, yeah, if it's implemented properly.
Okay, let's talk about geopolitics now, specifically the Quad.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of talk lately about the Quad and China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic in international relations.
So can you just define for us what is the Quad?
Yeah, so the Quad stands for the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, and it's a strategic forum that brings together four major democracies: India, the United States, Japan, and Australia.
Okay, and was the Quad's primary focus?
Well, their main goal is to promote a free, open, and rules-based Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, so they're all about maintaining peace and stability in this crucial region.
Exactly. Yeah, and they did that through a combination of diplomacy, economic cooperation, and security collaboration.
Now, it's important to clarify that the Quad is not a formal military alliance, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's more of a loose partnership or a strategic grouping.
Okay, so it's not like NATO where there's a mutual defense treaty.
No, but they do engage in joint military exercises, and they share intelligence, and they coordinate their diplomatic efforts.
So it's a significant level of cooperation nonetheless.
Absolutely.
Now, how does the Quad actually operate in practice?
Well, they have a number of different mechanisms for cooperation. They hold annual summits at the level of heads of state or government. They have regular meetings of their foreign ministers. And they also have 6 working groups that focus on specific areas of cooperation.
Okay, what are those 6 working groups?
So the 6 working groups are focused on global health security, climate change, critical and emerging technologies, space cooperation, infrastructure development, and cybersecurity.
Wow, that's a pretty comprehensive agenda.
It is, yeah. It shows that the Quad is not just about security, but it's also about addressing a wide range of shared challenges.
Now, the Quad hasn't always been as prominent as it is today, right?
No, it's actually been through several phases. The idea of a quadrilateral security dialogue was first floated back in 2007 by Japan's then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe,
Okay,
but it didn't really gain much traction at the time.
so what changed?
Well, a number of things happened. First of all, China's economic and military power continued to grow,
Right.
and China became more assertive in its territorial claims in the South China Sea and elsewhere.
So that raised concerns among the other countries in the region.
It did, yeah. And then in 2017, the Trump administration came into office in the United States, and they were much more hawkish on China.
So they saw the Quad as a way to counter China's growing influence.
Exactly, yeah. And they really pushed for the Quad to be revitalized.
And it seems like the Biden administration has continued that policy.
They have, yeah. They see the Quad as a key part of their Indo-Pacific strategy.
Now, the term Indo-Pacific is used a lot in these discussions. Can you just define that for us? What exactly does it encompass?
Yeah, so the Indo-Pacific is basically the vast maritime space that stretches from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
And it includes the land masses that border those oceans. So it's a huge and strategically important region.
Why is it so strategically important?
Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, it's home to some of the world's most populous countries, including China, India, Indonesia, and Japan.
Okay.
It's also a major hub for global trade and commerce, and it contains some of the world's most important sea lanes.
So controlling the Indo-Pacific would give a country a lot of power and influence.
Exactly, yeah, and that's why the Quad is so focused on maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Okay, so to summarize the Quad, it's a strategic grouping of 4 major democracies.
Right.
India, the U.S., Japan, and Australia. Their goal is to promote a free, open, and rules-based Indo-Pacific region.
That's right.
And they do that through diplomacy, economic cooperation, and security collaboration.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic now. Sagarishwar Wildlife Sanctuary.
Okay.
So this sanctuary has been in the news recently because of its thriving deer population?
Yeah, it's got a remarkably high number of sambar and cheetal deer, especially considering that it's a man-made sanctuary.
A man-made sanctuary, that's pretty unusual, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's actually India's first man-made wildlife sanctuary.
Wow, so they basically created a forest from scratch,
They did, yeah, and they introduced various wildlife species into it.
and it's been successful.
It has, yeah. It's a testament to the power of ecological restoration.
Where is this sanctuary located?
It's in the Sangli district of Maharashtra.
Okay, and how big is it?
It covers an area of about 1087 square kilometers.
Okay, and what's the origin of its name, Sakeshwar?
Well, it's named after the ancient Sagreshwar temple complex, which is located within the sanctuary.
Okay, so it's got a cultural significance as well as an ecological significance.
That's right, yeah. The temple complex is home to numerous smaller temples dedicated to Lord Shiva.
Interesting. And what kind of vegetation does the sanctuary have?
Well, it's mainly southern dry, mixed deciduous forest and southern thorn forest.
Okay, and what are some of the other animal species that are found there besides the deer?
Well, in addition to the sambar and cheetal deer, they also have black bucks, Indian muntjac, wild boar, peacocks, striped hyenas, Indian foxes, and porcupines.
Wow, so it's a pretty diverse ecosystem.
It is, yeah, considering that it's man-made.
Okay, so just to recap, the Sageswar Wildlife Sanctuary, it's located in Maharashtra.
Right.
It's India's first man-made wildlife sanctuary.
Yes,
And it's home to a thriving population of deer and other wildlife.
that's correct.
Okay, let's move on to our last topic for today, the Automated Permanent Academic Account Registry, or APARID.
Okay.
So this is a digital identification system for students in India that's part of the National Education Policy 2020,
Right.
and it's based on the concept of one nation, one student ID.
Exactly.
So what's the main purpose of the APRID?
Well, the goal is to create a centralized database of all academic records for every student in India.
Okay, and how will that work in practice?
So every student will be assigned a unique APR ID, which will be linked in their Aadhaar number,
Okay,
and all of their academic records from their school certificates to their university degrees will be stored digitally in their DigiLocker account.
okay, so it's like a digital locker for academic records.
Exactly, yeah, and this will make it much easier for students to share their academic credentials with potential employers or educational institutions.
Okay, and what are the benefits of this system?
Well, there are a number of benefits. First of all, it will streamline the process of verifying academic credentials.
Okay,
It will also make it easier for students to transfer credits between different institutions,
okay,
and it will help to prevent fraud and forgery.
right, because everything will be digitally stored and verified.
Exactly.
Now, there's been some confusion about whether the APARD is mandatory or voluntary.
Yeah, that's right.
So what's the current status?
Well, officially it's voluntary, but there's been a lot of pressure from the government for schools to enroll all of their students in the APR system.
Okay, so it's kind of like a nudge, nudge, wink, wink situation.
Pretty much, yeah. And the parliament has confirmed that it's not mandatory, but many parents may not be aware of that.
So it's important for parents to know that they do have the right to opt out if they choose.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to summarize the APR ID, it's a digital identification system for students in India.
Right.
It's designed to centralize academic records and make it easier for students to share their credentials.
That's right.
It's officially voluntary, but there's been a lot of pressure from the government for school to enroll all of their students.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive for today.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of ground today, but I hope you found it helpful.
Me too.
If you did, please like and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis of current affairs.
Yeah, and don't forget to check out part 2, where we'll be discussing even more important topics.
Until then, keep studying hard and stay curious.
See you in part 2.
Bye.